Please welcome Mayor of the City of Detroit, Mike Duggan, Director of the Planning and Development Department for the City of Detroit, Antoine Bryant. And to moderate the discussion, please welcome Senior News Analyst for WJR NewsTalk 760 AM, Lloyd Jackson.
Good afternoon, welcome everyone. We're here for this conversation with Mayor Mike Duggan, and we're going to talk about the rebuild and rebirth of the city of Detroit. I'm going to jump right in and start with you first, Antoine. You're the Director of Planning and Development. You know, this is not your first rodeo. You've been around, community and urban development for some years. Give me a little bit of your background.
Well, really, I just wanted to come to Detroit so I could work for a Minch. I mean, that's really what it was. I just made it simple. I greatly appreciate it. No, I'm a native of Brooklyn, East New York, Brooklyn, next to Brownsville, and I grew up in what many would call the projects. And when I was growing up in that environment, it was abundantly clear that my family and friends and the residents of the neighborhoods were never a part of the planning process. And that's what led me to pursue architecture and design academically. And after doing that with an undergraduate degree in planning and a graduate degree in architecture, I had the opportunity to pursue architecture as a profession, but I had much more of an affinity to jump all into community development. And so I started doing that in communities that looked just like mine. Doing that in Oakland, California, doing that in Houston, Texas, Austin, Texas, and I wanted to always give back. And had my eye on Detroit for quite some time. And the best part I could tell you about that is, and one of the things that really resonated with me, a dear friend of mine, Tiffany Brown, who I met in 2007, the very first time we were at an architecture conference, and everyone's welcoming and saying, I'm from Brooklyn, I'm from San Francisco, I'm from St. Louis. And this young woman, I'm from Detroit, And I was like, okay. Now, we were surrounded, and I was like, well, pleasure to meet you, and nice to meet you. And she's born and raised, and, went to LTU, 3 degrees from LTU, and she's like, I was like, well, tell me more about Detroit. Well, there's only one Detroit. And she was resolute about it, and that intrigued me tremendously. And I came to Detroit my very first time in 2008 for some conference, and what I'll never forget was I asked someone, I want to get something to eat, and I wanted listen to some music. And they're like, well, we'll give you, they sent me a couple of places. I don't know, where do you go eat? And where do you go listen to music? And so they gave me an address, and I got in a car and got in a cab, and found myself at Baker's Lounge on Livernois.
Yes.
And for all of those that have been there, I'm 6'5", and those booths weren't made for folks 6'5".
No.
But I came there, I had a huge plate of food, I got a drink that was probably way too strong, and but I was treated with so much warmth and so much, people brought me in, and I was like, okay, I need to find a way to work in this community. And so I kept my eye on Detroit for the last almost decade.
Mr. Mayor, when you talk about the beautification of the city of Detroit, rebirth, of course you got to have a plan, but you also have to have buy-in from the citizens. What have you been doing to get that buy-in from the citizens?
Well, I spent the last year talking to national candidates that were potential planning directors. Went through, a dozen interviews until I met Antoine. I think you just listening to him, you saw why it took me about 5 minutes in to decide on him. But we're at a different point here, and many of you have been with me from the beginning, but really much of the first 8 years I've been in office, we're talking about removing blight. I came in and there were 40,000 abandoned homes. People flew in from around the world and took pictures of the abandoned train station or book building or Cadillac stamping plant and did ruined porn. We needed to get graffiti off the buildings. Removing blight was what people wanted. That was the aspiration. We're at a very different place now. where we don't have to talk about removing blight. We can talk about building beauty. You look at what Ford is doing to the Michigan Central Depot in the neighborhood, it's spectacular. That Cadillac stamping plant was an abandoned hulk at Connor and Gratiot for 40 years, and now North Point is building the new Lear seating facility that's going to support the GM plant when they build the electric vehicles that Mark Royce was here talking about a little while ago. Dan Gilbert took a 30-year abandoned book building and is turning it into a 38-story absolute building of beauty. The Illiches just took the long-abandoned Eddystone and opened them as housing. And as you go into neighborhoods, it's not enough to talk about, hey, let's get the plywood down, let's build some streetscapes that you can be proud of. And when I talked to Antoine at that first meeting, I said, here is the thing, when we're talking about building the future, I can't have a bunch of planners come in from out of town and design the plan. Because the people who stayed, the people who didn't flee when everybody else left for the suburbs, they're the folks who need to have the voice, who need to do this. And as he talked about his experiences and the way that he involves the neighbors in the plan of the future, and we're about 50 minutes in, and Antoine looks down at his phone. And I'm thinking, all right, this isn't going very well. And so I said to him, Antoine, do you really want this job? He says, oh, sorry, my wife was texting me, asking me how the interview's going. I said, well, text her back and tell her you got the job.
You know, Mr. Mayor, you were talking about the rebuilding and how downtown and the buildings going up downtown. I remember when people came to Detroit and the way it looked, and people said, you know, you couldn't buy anything but a wig and a pair of shoes downtown. And now it's different. It's totally different. And now you're getting the same type of response in the neighborhoods, places like the Avenue of Fashion and McNichols and those areas that are coming up. And it's just amazing what's going on there as well, and the neighborhood is part of it.
Well, you had at the corner of 7 Mile and Livernois a B. Siegel that had been abandoned for 20 years. There are people in Detroit who still remember it as a destination for high-end clothing. But when we redesigned that Livernois stretch, we didn't just pave it. We put in streetscapes, we widened the sidewalks, we had lots of community meetings, and the neighbors voted that this is what they wanted. In the last 2 years, 22 new African-American-owned companies have opened up on that stretch, and it is now one of the most vibrant commercial districts in Southeastern Michigan.
Was that deliberate? It seemed like it was deliberate, a lot of minority and women-owned businesses there.
It was, two things happened. One was, it was deliberate that we said, right now, Detroiters are going to downtown Royal Oak, downtown Birmingham, if you want to have that shopping experience. There's great shopping experiences in the suburbs. Even Ferndale has come back to a really good commercial district, but Detroiters didn't have that experience. So we set out to do that. Then you pair it with something like Motor City Match, which provides startup money to folks who have a lot of talent and drive but don't have family access to money. And you put those two things together, a rebuilt district with access to financing, and it's just remarkable to see what the entrepreneurs in this community are doing. And we're replicating it on McNichols, we're replicating it on Kirchville, we're replicating it on Grand River, and Antoine's going to replicate it across the rest of the city.
So Antoine, is that how we leverage what we have on the Avenue of Fashion and leverage it to make it even better in other areas of the city?
No, we've had some tremendous successes that we already are seeing across Detroit, as the mayor just enumerated, and we have the opportunity here to really listen and engage our residents to be able to drive that initiative forward. One of the reasons why I was so excited about this, and I believe why the mayor chose me, is because my focus has always been on community engagement. I've been in this position around 8 weeks now, and for every single week, what I've been doing is walking and driving and talking to residents all across the city, because I wanted to hear from people. And what's fascinating, most of my conversations are very simple. You know, I'll just wander somebody at a Coney Island, or wander someplace to get a lineup, because, you know, brother got to get a lineup.
Always.
And you know, people talk to you, and they're like, so what are you doing here? You're not from here? I'm like, oh, I'm just visiting. You know, I just moved here from Texas. Well, what do you do? I work for the city. Oh, well, let me tell you about the city. And then that's usually how that works. And you know, I get great feedback, and that's fine, you know? And it's been across the city. It's been fantastic. I don't necessarily have to say I work for the planning and development department or I'm director. Really, I say I'm here to listen and to learn. And the residents have been tremendous in giving their opinion. And then I have to give a special tip of the hat to the Department of Neighborhoods. Ray Solomon and his team have given me a tremendous drive around the city. And they've been able to kind of tour me around the entire area, and it's been great. And so one of the things I committed to, and our department's going to do, is that there are over 200 neighborhoods in this city, and the Planning and Development Department is going to go to every single one of them, so they know that they're being seen, heard, and engaged.
Mr. Mayor, you talked about taking down the blight and all of that when you first got started, but now you have refurbished homes, new homes going up, and refurbished roofs being fixed, those kind of things. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, you know, we've had 8,000 houses in this city renovated already. Since I've been here, I've had, I think, 3 or 4 different people take out their phones and show me houses they renovated. One of them wanted me to talk to Antoine about buying the house from them. Detroit is truly a small town, the way we operate. But that really is it. But you think in these terms. When I started, there were 110,000 vacant lots in the city, and nobody cut them. The grass grew 4 feet high. So my first year, we cut them twice. And people said, that's great. You cut the grass twice. By the next year, twice wasn't enough. We now cut the grass 5 times a year. We're trying to remove the blight. But we said, wait a minute. How about we aspire for something more? We started selling the side lots to the neighbors that stayed. We've now had 19,000 homeowners buy the side lot next to their house, which means 19,000 times we went from a vacant lot to something that's got a garden on it, that's got a swing set on it, that's got a bench on it, and now we're ready for the next step, which is we've got a lot of other vacant lots in these neighborhoods that aren't next to somebody's house. I don't want some speculator coming in from out of town and buying them up so they can build on them someday. I want to have a process where the neighbors have a vision. And so what we're going to do is, as Antoine mentioned, Ray Solomon and the Department of Neighborhoods and Director Bryant are going to go to these communities, and with the federal money that we just got in the American Rescue Plan, we're going to have grants. How about a city where the neighbors who have been staring at these lots for years get to have a hand in redesigning what they want there and get some grants to make it happen? And that's a big part, I think, of why you wanted to come here.
It's one of the things that tremendously excited me as someone that grew up in Brooklyn, and Brooklyn's changed. Brooklyn's changed dramatically. But one of the things that I appreciate and I love about Detroit is that there's an opportunity now for Detroiters to own and decide how Detroit shall move. And that's the part that I thought was just fascinating. I want to see a part of. And for a city that is 80% residents that look like myself, I think that is an opportunity that cannot be replicated across this country. So I'm looking forward to seeing how Detroit's going to keep moving.
And that goes into quality of life issues when you talk about green space, and that's part of rebuilding and the rebirth of Detroit as well.
It is, and of course we have what Brad Dick and the General Services Department has done in the parks, which were a disaster 8 years ago, and now we've rebuilt 150 of them, and they are beautiful. And Arn Tellem, who introduced us, the Pistons, came in. When they came downtown, Arn said, I want to do something more for the neighborhoods. And I said, we have got beautiful parks across the city we're renovating. There would be nothing better than having first-class basketball courts. And the Pistons have rolled across the city, and they're building 60 basketball courts in the neighborhood. People get so excited. And, of course, the Pistons can't just put a court in. You've got to have the players come out and kick it off, and the kids come out, and then they do camps. But this is the way we do this as a community. We aren't just trying to get the grass cut in the parks. We're trying to build places of beauty that Detroiters can be proud of.
Another thing you hear from people back in the day is that, you have this beautiful waterfront, but you can't get to it. But now that's totally different, and it's not finished yet.
Well, the city I grew up in, as far as I was concerned, didn't have a waterfront. I mean, we didn't know it was there, right? You couldn't get to it. A bunch of cement silos and abandoned factories. I didn't know anybody who went down to the waterfront. And it started with Mayor Dennis Archer, who started to clear it out. the Detroit Riverfront Conservancy, Matt Cullen and Mark Wallace and all the partners who made it possible, to think in 15 years, and that's what it's been, USA Today names it the #1 river walk in the country. And they haven't finished. You look what Dave Egner and the Wilson Foundation is about to do, and it's going to be spectacular. But I thought I knew what was going on, and then Antoine told me about his weekend activities. But to give you an idea of how far we've gone on the riverfront, tell people what it was you did this weekend.
I spent all weekend at the Detroit Riverfront Conservancy, and what was fascinating about it, there was an entire weekend of activities, and each one was a totally different audience, right? I was there on Friday. There was Shimmer on the River. It was a kind of a celebratory fundraiser event where we had literally probably about several hundred people having a great time. All day Saturday, there was a citywide block party, right? So there was a block party during the day, and then there was a concert in the evening with local recording artists, and then El DeBarge, right? And so, you know, some of y'all was there. Don't act quiet now. And so that was a great, great time. And then on Sunday, there was Smoke on the River, right? And so it was a huge event for all the cigar smokers and aficionados, and had a phenomenal time. And I was telling my wife, you know, I was sending pictures. I was like, Detroit's always like this. It's beautiful. The water was coming in. It was 80 degrees. I lied, but it was wonderful. and it was just this phenomenal time to show how you can have a beautiful riverfront opportunity that was available for so many people to come and enjoy. It was family friendly, and it was something that we need to let all Detroiters know was a great amenity for all.
Is there more coming on the waterfront there on the west side?
We've got some things. We're going to do the entire, the West Front Conservancy has brand new plans that are about to be rolling out. Then also the connecting to the Joe Louis Greenway, which many of you are going to begin to hear, that will link all of the city as we go in a ring that'll get people to the riverfront. So we have a number of things that are going to allow and make this beautiful amenity accessible to Detroiters from all over town.
But the Joe Louis Greenway is an interesting thing, and probably most of you aren't familiar with it yet, but it has the potential to be transformative. But basically what we are doing is taking old railroad tracks and old rights-of-way in parts of the city where all they've been used for is illegal dumping. We're down like at Tireman and Joy, and building the most beautiful. If you've seen the DeQuinder Cut, it's like a big version of the DeQuinder Cut, and we're going to connect it in a 26-mile loop around the city. But it is so powerful to go out to Joy and Livernois, where the neighbors there will tell you that they have been neglected for years, and we haven't been important. And you talk about East English Village, and you talk about Corktown, and you talk about Hubbard Farms, but nobody talks about our neighborhood. When they see the beautiful park that's being built, and instead of guys going in at 2 in the morning and dumping trash in there, their children are going to be able to ride bikes into this. And we're building it 2-3 miles a year until we loop around. It is going to dramatically raise the property values in those neighborhoods. And this is really about building beauty. And we're not building it in one place. We're building it citywide.
Corporate neighbors, you kind of touched on that at the beginning about what part do they play in the rebuild of the city of Detroit?
Well, I would argue that our corporate partners are an integral part of this rebuild effort. One of the things that was very important for my coming on, and what made it so attractive, quite frankly, was this was one of the very few times in my professional history where I was able to see the private sector and the public sector and the philanthropic center all coming together to try to uplift a municipal area. You know, my interviews were with all of those entities. They all wanted to interview me and see if I was going to be the right fit, quite frankly. And to see their enthusiasm, to see everyone having a shared vision of how to create one unified Detroit was something that I found incredibly attractive. It also showed me the commitment that there was there to make sure that the city was available for all of its residents.
You know, I stood on this stage in 1999. There are probably still some people here who remember it. And I was working for Ed McNamara at the county, but David Adamany, the school board president, had asked me to do renovations of the school buildings, and you had roofs falling in and children literally in classrooms where water was coming down. It was awful. We had to do 240 buildings in 3 months over the summer, and they had the money to do it. And my thing was, I don't have any idea how I'm going to supervise 240 construction sites in the city. The potential for that to go bad was enormous. And I stood on this stage and I said, what I really would like is a company to agree to adopt a school, to drop in every day, look over their work plan, let me know how things are going, and be a separate set of eyes and ears. Now, the contractors were really pissed about the idea of these amateurs coming in and looking over their shoulder. I had 250 companies signed up, and a lot of them ended up contributing money for the playgrounds and doing reading with the children. And it said to me, the generosity of the business leadership in Detroit is remarkable. And if you look at what has happened now, not just in the riverfront, but across the city, a lot of it is driven by that same generosity. And many of you are here, and I just deeply appreciate what you've done for the residents of our city.
I just want to remind everyone, if you have questions for either the mayor or Antoine, to please go to the app and send those to the app, and then we will be talking about that momentarily, talking about those questions and have them up here. You know, Mr. Mayor, when you talk about a vision of rebuilding and beautification of Detroit, part of the rebuilding also means public safety plays a part in that.
It does, and congratulations to Chief James White, who was unanimously confirmed by Detroit City Council today. I know President Jones is here, but he's going to be outstanding. And so, if you look, and there was no doubt when Chief Gregg told me about his political ambitions, once my jaw got up off the floor, it took me about 30 seconds to say the single best administrator at using data, at using staff that I had worked with was James White, who at the time had already left to run the state Civil Rights Commission. And again, like my recruitment of Antoine, I called up, we went out to dinner, and the charter requires that I make an interim appointment, but the Board of Police Commission has to do a full search, make a recommendation, approved by me, approved by council. And I said to James White, look, I think, you'd be the right person. And he says, I got a great full-time job with the governor. He says, let me see if I follow this. You want me to quit my full-time job to be an interim, and then they may not pick me and I'm unemployed. And I said, man, you don't have a lot of confidence in yourself. You don't think you're going to get picked. He walked out saying, I promised myself I wouldn't accept an interim job before I walked in here. And when he started doing the interim job, of course, the community just rallied behind him. And we have already seen in the last 3 months a significant curbing in the trends on gun violence. You've seen more officers on the streets and in places of crowds, in the parks, and the like. And I just feel very, very good about where the Detroit Police Department is under James White's leadership.
Doing things for people who stayed in Detroit, very important. But you've always said, and you said at the beginning, that one of the things that you want to be measured is bringing people into the city. And we lost some population in the last census, but you're doing things to bring people back in. That's important too, to rebuild a city.
Well, I think a mayor ought to be judged on is the population of the city going up or down. And one of these years, the population is going to be up. And I actually think in the last couple of years it has been up. And I think before long we'll demonstrate that. But you can't look around the city and see all the new housing being constructed, all the vacant houses being renovated and occupied. When I first got here, you didn't see anybody working on a house in a neighborhood in Detroit. You have some time, just drive up and down the streets. It almost doesn't matter what area of the city you're in. There are work crews out and people fixing up houses because the property values have come up so high that now it makes sense to renovate your house. So I'm going to predict that next May, when the census estimates come out, we're finally going to celebrate the growth. But I'm going to stay at it until the city of Detroit. The population of the city dropped every year I've been alive. But I'm going to be here long enough, I hope, that I see it grow.
But Lloyd, I wanted to add to that. It's fascinating. When I first took this position and after it was confirmed by council, we made the announcement, and I was getting messages and DMs from literally all over the country about what's going on in Detroit, man. You going to Detroit? You leaving Texas? Like, you leaving Texas to go to Detroit? And But then the next question typically was, I'm from there. I would love to come back. Or my cousin is there, or my mother is there. And I realized so many of my friends, so many professional colleagues have roots or relationships in Detroit. And so I asked many of them, what would it take for you to come home? And almost to a man or to a woman, they said, if you can give me a place to live, and if I can have a similar job, I'd be there tomorrow. And so one of the things, the commitment that I made was like, we'll get you a place to live. We'll get you something to come. You'll come home. And it resonated with me so much that one of the things that we're looking at from a vision standpoint is come home. That will help this city grow. All the Detroiters that are around, if you go to St. Louis, if you go to Houston, Texas, if you go to New York City, there are Detroiters everywhere. They're not shy about it. They let you know.
Oh, absolutely,
Detroit.
yes.
And we have a conference coming up in Detroit, the National Organization of Minority Architects. And our 50th anniversary is going to be in Detroit because the organization was founded in Detroit. And the theme for that conference is Come Home. And so that's something that we are ringing loud and clear across this country, that if you've left after going to school in the area, or if you went for something that looked like a great opportunity, Detroit is the greatest opportunity you can have. So come on down home, come on back.
You talked about the people, refurbishing their homes and doing things. Why do you think they're so involved now as opposed to before?
It's really interesting. You go to Colorado, you go to Phoenix, people aren't from Denver. People aren't from Phoenix, right? I mean, but they are from Detroit. Mm-hmm. You've got people living in these houses. They're in the same house their families had for 3 generations.
Yes.
Now, when your property assessments in your neighborhood went from $80,000 to $20,000, you couldn't get a home improvement loan to fix up your house. But you hung in there because it was your family home. And you were going to stay there no matter what. Now we're to the point where you can get that loan. And very shortly, we're going to be rolling out a number of plans with City Council's approval for minor home repair money for low-income homeowners from the city of Detroit. And we're going to accelerate this to more neighborhoods. But, Detroit's in your blood. People love it. People want to stay, and that's what we're seeing.
We're going to be going to the questions in just a moment. So if you have questions, please go to the app, put them in the app. Before we go to the questions, I have another question that is, to me, really popular right now. Is there the speed humps in the neighborhood? I'm going through the neighborhoods and I'm saying, there's speed humps, but they're very popular with the citizens in the neighborhoods right now.
Yeah.
You'd be surprised at how often we get requests for those, and literally from all parts of the country. They're incredibly not only asked for, but they're very successful. And one of the things we try to make people understand is that they're there by request by our residents, and they also are a calming measure, right? To allow our residents to be safe, both pedestrians as well as the drivers, quite frankly. You can't go 40, 60, and 90 miles an hour when you got a hump in the middle of the street, right? Yeah. And so that allows for a safer environment for your drivers, but more importantly, a safer environment for our residents and our families. And so it's something that we're, very, very happy to ensure that we're responding to our residents, and our team has been integral in making sure those are installed as much as possible.
And the requests are like through the roof.
They're through the roof, Doc.
Let's go to the questions right now, and from the audience, let's have our first question. For the mayor. In 1999 at this conference, your ask to business leaders was about helping to restore Detroit public school buildings. What is your ask today?
So I'm in an interesting situation at the moment. We don't have an immediate crisis, but for everybody here who has a business, and I got to say, just so many of the auto companies have been so great. But if you think I'm going to open a business somewhere, I've got a new branch I want to open, just make your first phone call to us and give us the chance to pitch you first, because most times when you do that, we will be very successful. If you look at the Jeep plant with 5,000 jobs, you look at Ford with 5,000 employees over designing the automated electric vehicles of the future, over at the train station, you look at what General Motors is doing at Factory Zero, and then all of them are calling us and letting us know who their suppliers are. So we land Dakota over at the old Kettering site that's supplying Jeep. We just landed Lear at the Cadillac stamping site, supplying GM, Flexingate, which is supplying Ford. It's been a great thing. So that'd be my request. Antoine, what would you like from the folks here?
I want them to don't be afraid to call me, because we're going to work together a little bit more. I want to find a way for planning to work integrally with our corporate partners. We have the opportunity to look further out, and that's something that our team is steadily looking at. So it'll be my opportunity to meet with you all, because we want to continue to not only grow this city, but attract more. Your competition, no shame, but we want to bring as much business to the city as possible.
Mobility is really a big part of the rebuild and rebirth of the city, too. How will transportation play a role in the future of the city?
I think it's going to be a tremendous role. It's one of the things we talk about. This is the Motor City, right? So people are supposed to be moving. But I think it's something where we want to see you move as many different ways as possible. One of the things, my wife and kids were here for about 2.5 weeks. My daughter's 9 years old, and they are in love with the Boaz bikes, the little electric things. They rode around town the entire time. I was scared to death. But, you know, when your baby girl asks you to do something, you have to act like you're not scared of it. It's absolutely, come on, let's ride. And you know, I prayed though, I ain't gonna lie. But it's the opportunity when you are riding an electric vehicle, you're riding a bike, you see things at a different scale, right? And we want to integrate that level of mobility with also safe streets with our vehicles, also using the Q line as an opportunity to see the city in a different capacity. We want to ensure that we have a very smart but also very forward-looking conversation about how to integrate mobility around this city and make it as accessible to our population as possible.
Another question from our audience. In terms of tackling poverty in Detroit, how are we going to start creating wealth that transfers from generation to generation?
Well, I think we've started, and JP Morgan did an analysis for us about 5 years ago that looked at the workforce when Jeff Donofrio was running the program, and it showed that most jobs in the city were held by suburbanites, and most Detroiters worked in the suburbs. And when you dug into it, a lot of the high-end downtown office jobs, you had people driving in from the suburbs, and some of the maybe middle school jobs in the inner ring were coming from the city. And so we really sat down and said, we're going to have a strategy, which is I want downtown to continue to grow. It's tremendous. I want the healthcare industry to continue to grow. It's been a major source of employment. But we sat down and said, what are those middle skill jobs? You can make $35,000, $40,000 a year with benefits to start. What are those jobs and how do we get them here? And that's why we went hard after that Jeep plan. And at first we were being dismissed in the media, then it was FCA. They had 600-acre cornfields in 4 different states they could have built on. And I was saying to them, okay, I think I can close St. Jean Street, and I think I can buy you some parcels here, and I think I can do this all in time for you. But they trusted us. And then what happened was, the biggest thing is Nicole Sherrod-Freeman in our Detroit Workforce Group said, because you're in Detroit, we can help fill your jobs. We set up these job fairs. We had 20,000 people come through these job fairs. And FCA agreed that the first interviews would go to Detroiters. If we couldn't fill the job with Detroiters, they could hire from anyplace else, which was fine. But we went through and we said to our folks, you're going to be on your feet all day. You're going to have to pass a math and reasoning test. You're going to have to pass a drug test. These are the things that you're going to have to do. And we gave them a sample math and reasoning test. And if they did poorly, we set up tutoring sessions, nights and weekends in churches. Some of the most powerful scenes I've seen were those Saturdays with these folks who may not have been in high school for years, passing those things. The Jeep plan has now hired 4,000 new employees, all 4,000 from the city of Detroit. That's what we're doing. And we're going to do this for Amazon, and we're going to do this for GM, and we're doing it in ways for like Nurses Aid, for Henry Ford Health System, and DMC and Ascension. And so this is where we're doing it for a lot of restaurants and hotels. But this is what we want to do. Detroit used to be the place that you could go. And so we've got a community health board that's now going into some of our households with the most extreme financial situations, helping people deal with their immediate needs so they're secure in their housing, and then moving folks to the place where they can earn these kinds of income. And this is ultimately the way you build generational wealth, is through good paying jobs close to home, and that's what we're trying to do.
Our next question for the mayor. With 9,000 employees and 8 years in the rear view, how have you been able to change the culture in municipal departments that are slow to change? And how do you manage against entrenched culture?
Well, I mean, this has been my life from the time I went into the smart bus system in the 90s to when I went into DMC in the 2000s. And you go into situations usually where you have what I would call learned helplessness, that people who have been there, who have been not succeeding for so long, there's a way to blame others. And I went into DMC, they lost $100 million a year for 5 years. And when I got there, it was nobody's fault. And I realized the people who had survived through all of that were the people who were most skilled at blaming somebody else. It just was true. And so I said, guys, I really don't care about the elaborateness of your explanation. All I want to know is, do you hit your numbers or not? And I brought the same thing to the city of Detroit. The ambulances were taking a half hour to show up. The national standard is 8 minutes. We had a guy in the fire department. I gave him 6 months. He had to get down to 8 minutes. He got down to 11 minutes. I replaced him. And he had a really good reason why it wasn't his fault. And I replaced him. Everybody, how many preventive maintenance did you complete on the buses? How many bus pullouts did you have? And it's an interesting thing that happens is when you realize nobody cares about the drama. I'll give you the help to succeed, but we now have a team that when we walk in one day and said Fiat Chrysler is going to put a $2 billion plant somewhere in America, everybody said, we're going to win. And it took a while to get there. But, I mean, you've got a chance to see the culture. How does it seem to you?
I think I've had a great time, quite frankly. And I know I have to give a kudos to my predecessor. I inherited a great staff in planning and development. So we are working very, very well. But it's been very collaborative. So I call HRD, I call GSD, I call Parks. Brad and I talk all the time. So that's my guy. But we have a real collegial kind of opportunity because everyone that I've met is committed to seeing this city be a better city. And that's something that I think is incredibly exciting.
The next question from our audience for Antoine. Can you talk about some of the landmark projects that you've done in other parts of the country and around the world, for that matter?
Sure. My very first one, the one that's near and dear to my heart, when I was leaving and finishing grad school in architecture, I joined Project Row Houses in Houston's 3rd Ward, and we created a nonprofit called Row House Community Development Corporation. The organization originally was focused on the revitalization of shotguns in Houston's 3rd Ward into making it an art installation. But they also wanted to make affordable housing. They realized that in that part of Houston, that over 80% of the children born in the neighborhood were born to single moms, and most of those moms did not have the opportunity to finish school. Primarily, they had food insecurity, they had housing insecurity, but the organization did not have the capacity or the expertise to put up new housing. We partnered with Rice University School of Architecture to come up with some construction documents, and they needed somebody to get these roller drawings into like a real development. And so it was my purpose. I remember I went to that interview, had a full suit and tie. Some of the staff will laugh. I had a full suit and tie, and I was in this community development organization going for an interview. And I went to a room where kids were playing around, and no one actually engaged me. And so I was like, hey, I'm here for an interview. And my interview was over a game of dominoes. That was my interview over a game of dominoes with these 3 old guys who beat the brakes off me. But eventually, I got hired, and what we were able to develop with that CDC was not only the first affordable housing in Houston's 3rd Ward in over 20 years, but we created what we call the Residents Empowerment Council, where I knocked on every door in a 35-block radius to let them know we have new housing coming in this community and we have a new development coming in this community, but we need you to help define and decide what that future shall be. Now, 10 years later, 15 years later, those 8 units have turned into 60 units of affordable housing. That same community is now the leading resident-led community group in the entire city of Houston. And now, going back to the mayor's point about property value and property taxes, those residents have seen their values double for all the homes that are around the area. So this was an initiative that was community-driven and community-led, and has led to now not only just success in that community, but empowerment of those residents that are there.
This is an issue that everybody across the country is dealing with. Cities across the country experiencing significant infrastructure challenges. What's the plan to rebuild Detroit's infrastructure, and how are we going to pay for it?
Well, there's so many different pieces. If you'd asked this question a year ago, people would have talked about roads. In the city of Detroit today, people are thinking about stormwater capacity. And it shows you how fast things can change. And anybody who doubts climate change has not been around here this summer. But, you know, we've got a stormwater system that was built in the 20th century and served the city and the region extremely well. It basically can handle 3-inch rainstorm in 24 hours, which happens about once every 50 years or so. And beyond that, you have a problem. In 2016, we had a storm that was 4.5 inches. We had 20,000 people's base was flooded. That was a once in 500-year storm. June, we didn't have a 4.5-inch storm. We had a 6-inch storm. And we're starting to say the assumptions that have been made in building the infrastructure in this country need to be reassessed. And of course, you see it on the East Coast in the way they're rebuilding after hurricanes. They build back very differently. You look on the West Coast at what they're doing to protect against fires. And so we are very fortunate, and that Gary Brown, who runs the Detroit Water and Sewer Department, is emerging as a national leader. And our problem primarily is this. We've got, when this rain overwhelms our system, we have low-lying areas on the far east side and the west side along the Dearborn border. Those of you who live in Grosse Pointe and Dearborn know you are in those low-lying areas as well. And it's going to take a few years to build the capacity. And so I sit down with Gary Brown and say, okay, I'm not going to say to people for the next 3 years, every time we get a rainstorm more than 4 inches, you can't use your basement, you've lost everything. And so you'll see us roll out a plan in the coming months to protect those basements with so-called check valves that will block that storm drain from backing up on you. And already Gary's got his team figuring out how to put in design capacity in the areas that are most affected. There's going to be significant federal money, there's going to be significant state money. Money's not going to be the issue, but of course Dearborn's trying to do the same thing, Grosse Pointe's trying to do the same thing. A lot of other cities in Michigan that got flooded in these rainstorms are trying to do the same thing. Our biggest problem is going to be contractor capacity, because everybody's going to be going after the same contractors for the same kinds of activities. But I'm very confident that you're going to see us roll out an effective plan to deal with the water infrastructure in the coming months.
We got about just a minute, and let's get this last one in from our audience. Some people are concerned about fewer commuters working downtown post-pandemic. How worried are you?
I think that's a reality. Not in just Detroit, it's going to be true in Chicago, it's going to be true in New York, it's going to be true in Philadelphia, it's going to be true in Los Angeles. Those of you who are in companies now, are you going to ultimately go back and when we beat this pandemic, are you going to be using as much square footage in your offices as you were before, or have you found different ways to work? And so I do think that cities around this country are going to see fewer offices. One of the interesting things is Debbie Stabenow is already sponsoring legislation at the federal level to provide tax credits to convert office space to housing in cities. And I think what you're going to see evolve, and I don't know whether it's going to be 10% of our office capacity or 25%, but I think you're going to see evolve in the major cities in the country more of a mix of residential along with the office, and I think you'll see the businesses in the area evolve as well. So we are working very closely with our partners, but I'm confident that we'll address it effectively.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are out of time. Antoine Bryant from the Department of Director of the Planning and Development Department, Mr. Mayor, thank you for being here, and I hope you all enjoyed this conversation, and I hope you had. I hope you came away with a better understanding of the mayor's vision for the city of Detroit. Thank you so much, guys, for having me here as well. Thank you to the chamber. Have a good day. Thank you.